In Dan Brown's The Vinci Code, more than 80 million copies sold, a historian character explains where the Bible came from. It was collated by the pagan Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, he says. More than 80 Gospels were considered for the New Testament. The losers were outlawed, gathered up, and burned. And at Constantine's Council of Nicaea in 325, the divinity of Jesus itself was put to a vote. A relatively close vote at that. Until that council, the novel says Jesus' own followers had taken him for a mortal prophet. Almost none of that is true. Constantine's one documented intervention in the Bible's production is a letter, and the letter survives. The myth begins at the council in 325. Constantine called the empire's bishops to Nicaea. The crisis was Arius, an elder from Alexandria who taught that the Son of God was a created being, the highest of all creatures, but a creature. The council answered him with a creed, a short exact statement of belief, confessing that the Son is fully God. It also ruled that every church keep Easter on the same Sunday, and issued 20 rules of church order. We have the creed, the rules, and letters from men in the room. Eusebius, the bishop of Caesarea, wrote home that same summer explaining what he'd signed. Not one of those documents says a word about which books belong in the Bible. No ballot survives at all. What survives is the signed creed, and all but 2 bishops put their names to it. And nobody in that room thought Jesus was merely a man. The fight was over how he was God. Arius said made, the council said not made. Around the year 112, the Roman governor Pliny had already reported to his emperor that Christians met before daylight and sang to Christ as to a god. Rome knew what Christians made of Jesus 2 centuries before it had a Christian emperor. The scene people half remember, Gospels sorted at the council, does exist in writing, in a Greek history of the councils composed more than 500 years after Nicaea. The bishops laid the candidate books beside the communion table, it says, and prayer sorted the true from the false. Voltaire retold it in the 1760s, and it's circulated ever since. The 80 Gospels are easier. Other Gospels existed, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter. Dozens more known by name, but no ancient writer counts 80, and the church hadn't waited for an emperor to answer them. Around 180, almost a century and a half before Nicaea, Irenaeus, the bishop of Lyons, wrote that the Gospels the church receives are 4: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So where did the Bible come from? Slower, and from lower down, through copying desks rather than council tables. The church's word for its official list of books is the canon, and it grew the way trust grows. Congregations read the apostles' writings aloud, copied them, and traded them. Paul himself told the Colossians to swap letters with Laodicea. An anonymous Western Christian around 200 described a collection containing about 22 of our 27 books, plus 2 that never became New Testament books. Scholars call the document the Muratorian Fragment. A few date it later, but most leave it at the end of the 2nd century. The edges took longer. A handful of books, Hebrews, James, 2 Peter, 2nd and 3rd John, Jude, Revelation, were received in some churches and questioned in others. Eusebius, finishing his history of the church just before Nicaea, sorted the books into the acknowledged, the disputed, and the rejected. The 4 Gospels and Acts sat in his first column, and the books that were argued over were the ones at the margins. Now, the one thing Constantine actually did. Around 331, he wrote to that same Eusebius. Constantinople, his new capital, had been dedicated the year before, and its new churches needed scriptures. So the emperor placed an order: 50 copies of the sacred scriptures, on fine prepared parchment by professional scribes in a form convenient and portable, with 2 of the empire's post wagons to haul them. We still have the letter. Eusebius published it in his Life of Constantine. The letter never names a book. It assumes the bishop knows which ones, and the emperor writes it as a customer would. One detail is genuinely unsettled. Eusebius says he sent the volumes in 3-fold and 4-fold form, and scholars still argue whether that means bundles of 3 and 4 or 3 and 4 columns to the page. Copies older than Constantine survive. Paul's letters on papyrus from around the year 200. John and Luke about the same age. A large-scale imperial rewrite would have left discrepancies in the substantial pre-Nicene manuscript tradition. Instead, the surviving portions show ordinary scribal variation, not a new Constantinian version of Jesus or Christian doctrine. A magnificent Greek Bible from Constantine's own century does survive Codex Sinaiticus, and it tells us something the myth can't explain. Alongside our 27 New Testament books, it carries 2 more, the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas. Decades after Nicaea, the grandest Bible in the world was still carrying books that had not settled onto the list. The earliest surviving list of exactly our 27 books comes from Athanasius, the Bishop of Alexandria. In the Easter letter he sent his churches in 367, 3 decades after Constantine was dead. These alone, he wrote, let no one add to them, and let nothing be taken away. Councils at Hippo in 393 and Carthage in 397 confirmed the same list. And even then, the Syriac-speaking churches of the East went on reading a New Testament of 22 books, a different 22 without Revelation or 4 of the short letters, for centuries afterward. To be fair, the myth is built from real parts. Constantine did call the council. He did put the empire's treasury behind the church. And he did burn books. After Nicaea, he ordered Arius's writings handed over and burned, and hiding a copy became a crime punishable by death. The books just weren't gospels, they were the works of the man whose teaching the council had judged false. The myth also reverses where the book's authority came from. Even the real list makers weren't handing authority down to these books. Athanasius called them the springs of salvation, handed down and received from the beginning. The church took them as the testimony of the apostles, breathed out by God. The lists, Athanasius's, and the councils at Hippo and Carthage, drew the line where the church had long been living, ratifying what those churches already read rather than conferring standing on it. That's why, a generation before Constantine ordered his 50 copies, Christians under the Emperor Diocletian had accepted death rather than surrender the scriptures they had already received and read. Nobody dies for a table of contents. They died for the word of God. So, did Constantine change the Bible? He never chose its books and never edited its text. What the most powerful man in the world actually did when he turned to the church's book was simpler than the myth. He ordered more copies,